3, 2, 1. Hey there, spiritual dope. Brandon Hanley here, the voice of a generation. As we may as well self-indulge every once in a while. And I'm on with somebody quite special, Elyse Archer. And I'm gonna let her do the bio for herself in a second here. But before I do that, like, Elyse is the reason I do a podcast. Right. Before I met Elyse, I'd never listened to a podcast, or I was like, fuck podcasts. Like, that's not for me. And when I met Elyse, Elyse, you were doing your podcast with Greg and Martin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and then we were connecting at some of the networking events, and then I eventually hired you as my coach. And then when we got through the coach, it was for sales coaching. We got midway through the coaching, and I was like, this is more like I'm getting life coach than sales coach, and it's okay because it's transferable, but like, I was like, well, you know what, Elyse, what we've been working on, like, it's been the sales, but I really want to do this like podcast. And I was fully expecting you to be like, eyes on the prize, Brandon, focus on what you said you were going to focus on, and, gun it. And instead of doing that, you're like, well, how can I help you? Right. And you connected me with some other people. And that moment, that was like a life-changing moment for me. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. And I'm going to let you do your own little brief intro. Like, Elyse, what are you all about? And, share a little bit of that, and then we'll get it going.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Yeah, it's so cool just to see what you've created in a short amount of time, and to see the evolution of it as well. So yeah, thank you so much. I was thinking before coming on this podcast, this is so much fun for me because I do most of the podcast interviews I do are straight business, sales, personal branding. And so this is pushing my limits because this is actually the stuff I care about. Like, this is the real, I feel like everything I do in the sales and business world is kind of the Trojan horse to try to like talk to people about spirituality and help them just develop and grow personally. So this is so much fun. Okay. So with that about me, I'm a new mom. So I've got a little boy, he's 6 months old, and that's so much fun. Yeah. It's the best. I love it. I didn't know how I was going to feel going into all of it. And I love it.
Does.
Oh my gosh. No, I know. And he's past the blob stage now. So he's doing things, which was, especially for my husband, Jason, I think it's more fun for him now that he can interact. And I'm a business owner. So I do a couple different things. I'm a founding team member of a company called Brand Builders Group. We're a personal brand strategy firm. And then I also recently launched another brand that I'm running called She Sells. And it's basically sales training and mentoring for women who want to break through six figures and learn to sell in a way that feels really authentic to them. And we can, take this conversation wherever you want it to go, but that's a lot of my background is coming from corporate sales and seeing, sales and business strategies celebrated that frankly made me feel like crud when I implemented them, because they either kind of blurred the lines of integrity or were all about push, hustle. And I did it. I did what I was taught. And I did pretty well, but it was really, really detrimental to not just my mental health, but my physical health too. And so a lot of my own journey has been about, I would say, a reconnecting with myself, like how I'm actually wired, how I was innately designed, and learning to trust myself, trust my instincts, trust my body, trust my intuition. And I'm really lit up now about helping everyone do that. But specifically, my brand really is catering to women, because I think so much of what we're taught just growing up is like we our bodies look wrong, or they're not the way they should be, or they're for other people's pleasure. And it's really disempowering. And so I'm so passionate about helping myself reconnect with my power, and then helping other women reconnect with their power as well. So that's a little sliver of what I'm all about.
Just a tidbit.
Yeah. Just a little bit.
I love it. And again, when we connected, it was just, I think it was just an interesting journey. You and I, our connection, right? And just kind of how that all, we'll call it, manifested. And let's start off with the first question now. So we have all day to talk. So usually like to start these off with, you talked about connecting with your power. I always align it with like source, right? So the idea is that source speaks through us to speak to somebody else, right? You kind of get this divine inspiration to share something with somebody else. So the deal is, there's somebody listening to this podcast today that needs you to kind of ignite them, to connect them to their power through a message. And what is that message to that person today, Elyse?
I love that question. I mean, the biggest thing that shows up for me is to trust yourself. That's, like I said, that's so much of what I feel inspired to share with this brand. And like I mentioned before, a lot of my journey, especially in my teens and 20s, were it was not trusting myself, and whether that was not being proud of my body, and I struggled with an eating disorder for 17 years, or feeling like something was just off with like a client situation or something I was being told to do at work. All the way to, when we got pregnant for the first time a couple of years ago, I went into sheer panic that I was like, I felt like I was going to lose the pregnancy. And I went into sheer panic about it. Sure enough, we miscarried. And I learned in that moment, I didn't trust my body. And it's been so interesting, this journey of learning I think a lot of times we have to like kind of be brought to our knees to be able to be open to whatever that message is that we're meant to receive and then carry forth into the world for other people. And that was it for me. But then even talking with my mom about it, a lot of her own experience too was she didn't trust her body. And I think a lot of this stuff goes back generationally. So, that whatever that thing is that you feel like you want to do, but you can't do, or you have this intuition to do something, but you're like, that logically doesn't make sense. If I could encourage someone to listen to it and trust that it doesn't have to make sense for anyone other than you, and to kind of stop looking outside of yourself. I promise I'll be quiet in a second so you can respond or ask your next question. But I think about the coach I'm working with right now. Like I just did a pretty big financial investment to work with a new coach. And I knew that it was going to trigger all of my scarcity mindset that part of me was still clinging onto. I knew it. And sure enough, a couple of weeks in it did. And I knew in my core, in my intuition this whole time that it was the right move, but logically it would not be anything that my dad would have told me to do. It wouldn't have been anything that a lot of even business mentors who I look up to would tell me to do. And I was on a call with her a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I found myself going into panic about making the wrong decision. And she was like, when do you find yourself going into panic about that? And I said, usually it's when I'm reading like a business book, or I'm listening to a financial management training from somebody else. And she was like, stop it, cut it off for the next 3 weeks, no consumption of any of that stuff. And I cut it off, and I feel so at peace. So it's not that we want to not learn and educate ourselves and challenge our thinking, but I think at the end of the day, your best path for you. And you have to trust that everything that you're doing, and when you act on those instincts, it's always unfolding for the greater good and for your greater good. So sometimes just putting those blinders on and trusting that what you need to do is the most powerful thing you can do. So that would be my message.
Thanks for keeping it short.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, this is going to be all day.
I kid. I loved it all. Like, and one of the parts where you brought it to, you had to kind of come to your knees, right? To just kind of accept your intuition piece. For a lot of people, would you consider that the ephemeral dark night of the soul for you? Would you consider that a moment of or maybe like even a dawn night of the soul, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's the idea. I love what you're saying there with your coach, because I'll bet you it's almost like a deprivation for you, knowing how much you consume to improve or be better or find another technique or whatever, right? You're like, oh, I have to cut all that off, right? Like, so you probably feel a little bit like a junkie having to withdraw from that, Elyse. Look, and I know this from my own experience, right? I'm like, what do you mean? Don't do it all like right now.
Yep. So that was, and that one thing I'll just add to that is like, she really kind of pushed me with that, because I was like, but I love learning, and learning is good, and I love reading. She was like, that's your comfort zone. She said, study yourself for 3 weeks, just study yourself. I was like, wow. Oh, this is so uncomfortable, but that's right. That's what we need.
Well, that's tough too, right? So jumping in there and studying yourself. And what I'll throw in there though too is like, so it's very, I'm still going through this book again, right? Like, Are You Ready to Succeed? I can't remember if I might have sent you one too. I can't recall if I did. I think I sent you there was a kid's book that I sent you recently.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this book.
So this is Sri Kumar Rao. This is actually by way of Elyse Archer at some point. It was back in the day when we were doing the coaching, and there was a guy that I looked up, Sri Kumar Rao, on like, You Are Hardwired for Happiness, right? It turned out like, I almost cried watching his little story or whatever. And I was like, all right, well, I got to get his book, yada, yada. I went through it. But one of the pieces in here, it just really talks about, there's two pieces in here that you're saying that resonate with me. And one is like talking about putting all that effort in, right? With like, I got to consume content. And you were finding like each time you like found something that didn't correlate with how you were feeling or doing, it was like striking the wrong chord, right? Quite literally. It's like, you're like, that's out of tune with who I am. Oh my God, I need to make an adjustment because this person, you wrote this book and he's an authority, right? He knows. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't have. Holy shit, did I do the wrong thing? Right? So that's one piece, right? Is to not let the wrong thought into your head, right? It's better like literally cut yourself like with a razor. He says in this book, this came from like a Swami, right? It's better to cut yourself with like a razor than to let the wrong thought into your head. Right. Which sounds to me like, that's kind of like what was happening to you. Like, you're on your path, but you're like, this guy's awesome. I love 98% of what he does, but this piece right here is just like a BB in my mind, right? Breaking all my shit. No, thank you so much. Right. And then the other piece is like, we're trying to do it so fast, right? We're trying to do it. So we want it so bad. We're trying to do it so fast. There's another story in this book where he talks about the idea of, if you try to do it so fast and with so much energy, it's actually going to take twice as long. So it sounds like your coach, sounds really similar to what your coach is saying. Stop taking all this like outside influence and jamming all this into your cranium. Study yourself, trust yourself. And that's what you're saying too, is like kind of trust yourself and believe in yourself and kind of tune out all the other shit.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting what you said about if you try to like push and force it and do it so fast, it'll take twice as long. It's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that, but because it's counterintuitive, it makes a heck of a lot of sense because you're kind of going upriver versus letting yourself flow with stuff, right?
Yeah. Here's how like I've visualized it more recently, and this is like this year, right? Imagine like you're literally putting all thought, energy, or whatever things, right? If we're putting all this energy into this place, right, then nothing can get in. So if we create space for something to come in, right? If we back up for a second and let it come to us, then it comes to us, right? Because otherwise we're blocking it. We're like, oh, I've got to put everything into this. Yeah. Spiritual energy, right? Like I've got to put all of my, essence, energy into this thing. And I want it so bad. And if it doesn't, got all these things caught up with it. And instead you're like, I do really want it. I want it really bad, but like, I want it in kind of like the way I like flowers and gardens and stuff, where if I go and I plant it, there's that whole other thing too, where like, if you plant something, you don't keep pulling it up, right? And checking the roots and be like, oh, you plant it, fucking back up.
Yes.
It knows what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
It'll do. Anyways, those are some thoughts that are like, coming to mind as I'm hearing your story, right? And I'm hearing like your coaching unfold. So, thanks for letting me ramble on that.
I love this. This is I feel like I'm getting like a good, like a spiritual lesson from you in this. This is awesome.
Well, so here was the other thing, right? Like Elyse, guys, is I went through like my quote unquote, like and I call it quote unquote because nobody can like point a finger and say, hey, that was an awakening experience. But remember, if you don't remember that time I called you up, I was like,
yes,
I went through some shit. I don't know what it is. And, this is like an awakening experience. So Elyse has been, again, guys, let's, just want to share our relationship with the people that are listening, right? And how this kind of all came together. You came to me as like a sales coach, but what ended up happening was all this inner work that I hadn't done before for personal growth. And it manifested culminated into like kind of an awakening experience. Right. And from there, we still maintained. And again, that was another thing where you were like, well, tell me more about that. Like, cause you were just as excited as I was for that too. So I think that says a lot about kind of who you are and what you accept in your life. So I do want to hear like, how you talked about helping people find themselves spiritually through your own process. And I'd like to hear how you're doing that. Because it happened with me, might not have been intentional. And how do you feel like you're doing it intentionally right now?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Gosh, I don't have like an intentional method to it. I think it's more, let me think about that. Cause actually, I want to think about what the right, or just what the true answer is for me there. I think for me, a lot of my own journey has been around, overcoming a lot of feelings of unworthiness and worthlessness. And I think a lot of that is conditioned. That's part of why a lot of the clients I work with are in a business environment and a business setting. And so a lot of times they'll come for, I want to make more money, or I want to grow my personal brand and presence. And just through that process, usually what comes up is, are there tactical, pragmatic things that they can do to do that? Absolutely. But also, and I think the more important thing is we dig into just limiting beliefs that are showing up for them around, I want to make this amount of money, but even the word want means you don't have it, right? So, and especially with the women I work with, those you hear more about their story, and they talk about feeling unworthy or scared to show up or scared to speak up. And it doesn't matter how good your website is or how good your sales process is. If you have that limiting view of yourself, you're only going to be able to operate within a box that's like this big, right? And get results that are about that big. So I really, like I said, I don't have a set process. This is something I'm kind of like working on developing on right now, because I do want to be able to take people through a more intentional process. For me, it's typically kind of intuitive with my clients. But that's usually what I'm listening for when I hear my clients talk is, what are they actually saying about themselves? I was on a call with a potential client the other day, and the first thing she said when she got on our call was, she said, "Oh, I'm just sitting here procrastinating like I always do." And she's a woman who wants to break through 6 figures this year in her business, and she's a go-getter, and you can tell like she's an aggressive goal-getter. But the first thing I said was, whatever you describe, you prescribe, right? So if you're sitting there saying, "I'm procrastinating like I always do," you're going to continue to procrastinate on accomplishing your goals, on making your sales calls, on whatever it is. So I think because so much of my own journey involved poor self-talk, poor self-image, I can hear it and I can see it in other people. And then that's what I try to pull out, because usually we're not even aware of it. It's so ingrained in how we think and how we talk. And most of the people around us usually use disempowering language and thoughts. And so it's kind of just part of our society. But once you're aware of it, you can't unknow it. Right. And so I care so much now for myself about how I feel and how I speak about myself. And I try to get my clients to that same level of self-awareness, because the tactical stuff is like 5% of the actual process. The 95% of it is how you think and what you believe you deserve. So I don't know if that answered the question. Like I said, there's not a real thought out process. It's super intuitive for me, but that's kind of how I do it.
Well, no, I mean, it sounds like there is, right? So the process is to kind of just identify where they are, right? Are they saying something that, you've been able to look, I don't think it's any different than being a doctor, right? Kind of when you first start off, you're like, maybe I shouldn't amputate that leg. I don't know, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and cut that one off. And you're doing the same thing with like somebody's limiting beliefs, right? Or identifying it. And over time, like you become skilled enough to be like, oh, that's this, just because of your exposure experience. And then your own, of working with people in that space, seeing what works. A lot of these things that you're using, a lot of the tools that you're using, I'm guessing aren't brand new. Right? These are tools that have been around for quite some time, that have had success for years and years and years. It's just how do you share those tools with these people? So what would be like one thing that you help, like when you identify like a limiting belief within somebody else, right? How do you identify that for somebody to get them past that?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is just reflecting it back to them. So that's part of where there is value in having a coach, a mentor, just somebody who can hear how you talk and actually help you become aware and almost be a mirror for, do you realize you just said that? Because like I said, oftentimes our language is so so subconscious. We don't even realize we're saying it. So it's like, hey, do you realize you just said that? And then oftentimes people don't even realize it's a problem. They're like, well, so, so what? So what that I said that? And I think so for some people, they're already really into law of attraction and positive self-talk. But for a lot of people I work with, they're not familiar with what that means and how it impacts them. So we talk about, whatever you're saying, you're giving a command to your subconscious to create this thing in your life. And so we start to look at what's a new and better and different way you could say that. The other thing that has been really profoundly transformational for me in my life, and that I recommend for a lot of my clients, is Joe Dispenza's meditations. Like I'm guessing you follow him, and I'm such a fan of his work, but every single morning I'm doing those meditations, and I ask my clients to do the same. And it helps you start to feel the feelings of abundance, genius, courage, right? All those things that we want to embody. And so I get all my clients doing that as long as they're open to it. And that is pretty darn transformational as well.
No, 100%. Right. Yeah. Joe Dispenza is great. He's one, there's one that I listened, not even a meditation, but he's got like a 10-minute piece that like I listen to all the time. It just reminds me like not to look at my social media first thing in the day, not to, to retune yourself, right? Like to retune your whole experience, live life on your terms, not according to what kind of everybody else is already doing. And that's why I enjoy him and that. So meditation, getting them to connect with the meditations. Where did you find that to be kind of like a game changer for you?
So I've been meditating off and on for probably 5 years. Really longer than that, but like actually really going for it for about 5 years. But I would say I would do it for a while and then I'd get off of it because it was like, I still was in the mindset of this time would be so much better spent if I was sending emails or creating the social media posts. So I was still in that mindset. And really, I would say it's honestly been more in the past few months that it's kicked in for me how critically important it is. Where even though I think I had done a fair amount of work on releasing anxiety and like I mentioned, like not trusting myself and all that stuff. So I'd gotten to a pretty good place about 12 months ago, but I still would have almost this low grade anxiety running all the time in the background, especially on Sunday nights, looking at the week ahead of like, I've still got all this stuff that's undone that I thought I was going to try to get done this weekend. And I just piled too much on my plate. And then I would kind of beat myself up about, just not being, good enough. And if I was better, I could have gotten this done. So it was this habit and this perpetual like cycle that my body was almost addicted to the feeling and the anxiety. And sometimes we just have a moment. And for me, I just had a moment where I was like, doing it this way has gotten me this result. I've been feeling this low grade anxiety for years, for most of my life. What if I didn't have to feel that way? What if that wasn't the reality for everybody? What if it was just a decision that I was going to feel differently? And that's when I started really doubling down into a lot of Joe's work, and into just studying, the different energy centers of the body and how to get them in coherence. And I will say, it's a very short time as of the recording of this interview, but for about a week now, I've had really consistent, he talks about brain heart coherence, where you feel like in the flow all the time, no matter what. I've had that for about a week and it's been so transformational. Like I'm not afraid of anything that's coming. I'm not anxious. I'm at peace. I'm present with the people I'm talking to. I'm excited. I'm not triggered by stuff the way I was. And it's a totally different, I was able to get there like a little bit before, and I could get there and kind of keep it for a while during my meditations, but then something would happen in life and it would trigger me or throw me off and I'd have to like work to get back. And it's been really darn consistent for, like I said, about 7 days. And I think it was just a decision of, I can have this all the time if I want. And so now I'm showing up on that meditation mat with some ferocity, my friend, because it's like, oh, this is good. How much better could it get?
You show up to the meditation, be like, I'm going to take this bitch down.
Yes.
So that's great. So there's a word that I use in tandem kind of with what you're talking about there, and that's the word numinous, right? Like where you've got this connection to source, and it's just effervescent, and it sounds like that's been your week, right? Nothing can derail that, right? There's nothing stronger than it, and there's no worry. You've given yourself some trust, you've given yourself some grace, and there's it's just such a great feeling, right? Where you're just like, how and where's, and it's always been available, right? That's the thing. Like you're like, well, all I had to do was make a decision to make this a conscious choice.
That was it. Yeah. And it's not like nothing has happened. Like I got a mega tax bill I wasn't expecting because of a miscommunication with my accountant. And in the past that would have thrown me, you know, and this time it was like, okay, like and being honest, it threw me for a couple minutes. And then I was just like, I'm snapping back into it because nothing is worth sacrificing this level of vibration and awareness and feeling nothing. So we're just going to deal with it and move on.
Yeah. No, absolutely. 100%. Right. So I definitely talk about this in my process too, right? Where you make the decision, right? Literally, like, so I created this thing called the divine framework, right? The first piece of this process that you're talking about is to make the decision.
Yes.
Right. You're like, this is it. I'm going for it. Right. Yeah. But the one thing that, you talked about, like kind of this belief system, you talked about the boxes, right. And uncovering kind of like those limitations, right. Those self-imposed limitations. It's kind of like this whole mindset thing. This is just how spirituality has kind of shown itself for me, right? Like I did the coaching with you, awesome stuff, great stuff. Went through like law of attraction, right? And I was like, well, this is all kind of stuff that I'm putting out there. What if I shake it back and understand that this is a benevolent universe and that it probably wants things more for me than I actually want for me? What can you show me, right? And how can I take who I am internally, spiritual DNA is perfect, right? I mean, we all share the same spiritual DNA, but I went from having a human mindset with all these worldly things that we know how to use, right? And to your point, I've made it this far with this human mindset, with this human capability. I was like, what happens if I choose divinity? What happens then? Right? What happens if I'm connected to source at all time? And if I accept that source is everything, right? What am I capable of then? Right. And so that's just fucking blew the lids off it. I'm like, and that's again, just another choice to make. Right. And so you can take a look at spirituality and, can you call it, maybe it's Christ consciousness, I don't know, right? To decide, be like, hey, listen, this is Buddhist consciousness. I make this decision to do what you did, to say, I'm just going to stay connected to this shit because I feel real good. I don't have to drink to get here. I don't have to get high to get here. All I have to do is show up and decide to be here. It can't be that easy, Elyse.
It's it. It is a decision. I mean, that's it. That's been a huge lesson for me in the past 12 months. And I think we could be scared to make that, whatever the decision is, whether it's a decision to show up differently, a decision to move, right? A decision to, for me, invest in this high level coach. One other thing that happened for me a couple months ago is I made I guess it was more a month ago, I made a decision to spend more money than I knew where it was going to come from to work with this particular woman, because I felt very intuitively guided to do it. And I remember going through the fear, and I said yes to her verbally, and then I kind of shrunk back for a week and I vacillated. It was like, oh, this is a bad idea. It's not responsible. It's not smart. And I reached the point, and I think you saw my video I did on Instagram about this, but I was just thinking about, why am I not moving forward on this? And it was the fear of the unknown. It was the fear of making a bad decision in the unknown. But what it reminded me of was when I was in my late 20s, I was in a marriage that was really toxic. And I was so scared to leave because I was afraid of the judgment of being young and being divorced. And my family had put a lot of money into the wedding. And we were I knew before I got married to him, I shouldn't have, but at this point where I reached kind of the turning point, we were like 12, 14 months in. And I was so scared to do it because of the fear of judgment and what was going to be on the other side. Would I ever find someone who was actually a good fit for me, all that stuff. And I just reached a point where I said, it can't be worse than this, so let's pull the trigger and do it. And so I asked for the divorce, and 6 months to the day that I did, I met Jason, who's my husband. I knew within minutes that he was going to be my husband. Very inconvenient, by the way. In North Carolina, you've got to be separated for a year. So we were still, you be separated for a year before you can get remarried. So.
For the guys out there that are listening, they're going to probably they're going to want to know, what can somebody do in a couple minutes that makes somebody want to be married?
Right? I know. Yeah, they are. He just showed up, and I was like, you hear about, it when you know it, I'd never had that experience before, but I knew him. I knew that I was meant to be with him. So that's a whole nother story, because then I had to proceed to chase him and date him and all of that stuff. It was a frustrating courtship, I will say, but here we are. So if I had not,
you won that one.
I won that one. Yeah. Yeah. But if I had not left that situation that I was so scared to leave, I would not have met him, and we would not have our son, Jack, now. And that just puts things into perspective for me. And I think everyone can relate to something in their life where they've been so scared to make a move because they didn't know what was on the other side. But think about what happened in your life as a result of what you have now that you wouldn't have had if you hadn't stepped out in faith. And for me, that was like, this is it. Like, I don't know what's going to happen on the other side of this, but I know I can trust my intuition that's leading me to do this. And I know something really good is going to unfold, even if it's not what I'm expecting. So it's kind of that surrender and like, all right, I'm along for the ride.
That's it. I mean, that's it 100%, right? It's following your intuition and kind of, trusting it. Mm. And for you, that's seems to be working fairly well. It seems like, look, what I love too is like, listen, no matter how much of this work you've been doing on yourself, I've been doing on myself, anybody out there has been doing on themselves years, right? You're still catching yourself like beating yourself up, right? Mm-hmm. You're still catching yourself like, there are moments where everything's not fucking perfect. And that's okay. Like, and I think that can be a challenge too, because to accept that, right? To be able to say, this moment right here is not ideal for me. That's still going to show up no matter how much work you do. And I think that's important for people to hear and understand, because they put themselves into, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I shouldn't. Then they beat themselves up for feeling that way at all. Like you're saying, like, I shouldn't be doing this way. And I should be, should I have done it differently, and all these other things. And I've had another guy that I had on, and I know him well. He has the acronym TINA, right? There is no alternative. However you did it, right? There's no alternative to what's already been done. Love right. That. The only alternative maybe would be like your perspective on that. Like as you move forward, you'd be like, you know what? You can look back and be like, oh, you know what? In my mind at that time, this is what I thought was going on. But now if I look back, it's a totally different scenario. Your perspective on what happened may be different, but the actual event, there's no changing it, right? That's you're way past it. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But so how would address that though, right? Especially for you again, being a coach, having gone through like all this work and still finding, yourself kind of having those challenging moments. Do you accept those for yourself, or do you beat yourself up for having those? And then, how do you get through it? What do you do from there?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I do accept myself for having those. And I used to beat myself up a lot over it. And I think a lot of that is just, we see people, whether it's our parents do it. Like for me, I love my mom dearly, but I saw her do that my whole childhood growing up. So that's how I operated for a long time. So now with those moments, I'm so conscious of how I talk to myself, because I realize if I beat myself up, I'm only perpetuating the negative emotion, negative feeling. I'm just going to attract more of that back into my life. So, even yesterday I had an introduction to like a big time podcast to go on. And I had been like really psyched up.
We've been talking for a while.
I know. See, it's always working out for you. Yeah. So I had this. So this was like, like top 100. Like it was a big. It was just in terms of audience, a big show. And so I'd gotten myself kind of psyched up for it. And I get on the call with the woman I'd been introduced to, who was kind of like the gatekeeper, and she was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry if there's a misunderstanding. He's booked up for a whole year. Like, I just really wanted to get to know you. You seem like a cool chick." And it was like, in that moment, I felt disappointment. And then I gave myself like 2 seconds to feel it. And I was like, okay, nothing is worth feeling that. Nothing is worth perpetuating that. So let me instead flip this and focus on how can I show up for her in this moment? Because I genuinely believe everything is always working out for me. And if this is not the thing that's meant to be right now, it means there's something even better down the road. So cool. So let's have fun with this, and let's like show up and have fun. And then who knows what'll happen in the future. But I think it's that unattachment to like things being so perfect that, for myself, for a lot of people, right? I think a lot of women I work with, but everyone, we can get kind of caught up in perfectionism and things have to turn out the way we thought they would. But when you can be kind of unattached and just more attached to like feeling good and having fun and showing up in the moment, it's a heck of a lot more enjoyable. And you end up on the Spiritual Dope podcast.
And well, yeah, listen, you end up on, you could find yourself on Spiritual Dope too.
Right? I love it.
But the deal is too, right? Like, I mean, that is, the when you're talking about that 7 days of being connected, that's the spiritual high, right? That's what the Spiritual Dope is. That's the hits, when you got that meditation and you got that meditation buzz of, oh man, I was just so connected. I was so aligned. I was so detached from, I don't want to say worldly things, but I was so detached from all the activity and things that I felt like you were talking earlier, like, oh, maybe I got to go make another post. Maybe I got to go do this. Maybe I've got 10 minutes. I could squeeze in like 5 posts. Maybe I could get an IM in and check 4 emails. Right. Yeah. And instead being like your coach is saying, go study your fucking self for a minute. Right. Like, you're pretty special. Right. Recognize that, I think more recently, some of the meditations that I'll do would be like, how far can you visualize yourself out, right? And I'll be like, oh, infinite, right? The edges of the universe.
Yes.
But then more recently, I was like, well, inside is just as infinite too. Like, how deep can I go into myself? And it's infinite. So it's infinite internally as much so. And like, that one's just been like a new rocking revelation, right? Like, where you just kind of, you go internally and you just hang out with yourself, and you see that, like, you are 100% connected to source at all times. And it's like you're saying, it's a choice to say, I'm connected in this moment to the person, to the lady that was on the call, or I'm tied up in my own shit. And I could show up and be there for her, or be tied up in my own shit. And again, you're like, I'm gonna take this moment, be there for her, and be open for the intuition, the inspiration, what's coming out of this that is meant to be like the best.
Yes. And I want to add something to what you said about just studying the depth of ourselves. So one of my girlfriends, her sister passed of cancer a couple years ago, and they were super close, super, super close. And I wouldn't talk about this on most any podcast, but I'll talk about it here because I feel like you'll get it. So her sister passed, and then a mutual friend of theirs called my friend out of the blue a couple months later, and she was like, I don't know, I just feel like I have to call you, and we needed to reconnect. And this woman also channels and connects with people on the other side. And suddenly, while they were talking, my friend's sister Lauren started coming through her and saying, like, literally reconnecting with my friend. And what Lauren was saying was, she said, you have no idea how big we are. She said, now that I'm on the other side, now that I can see it, she said, imagine, like, zoom out, look at your house. Imagine you're looking at it from above. And you see the house, and then zoom out to the block and the street, and then your city, and then the world, and then the universe. She said, you're so much bigger. She said, we are so much bigger than we know. And she said, I can't wait for you to see this and know this. But she was just like, you should have this woman on your podcast. I could introduce you because it's powerful. It's so powerful. But that perspective from the other side of, we're so much bigger than we can even fathom.
Have you connected yourself to that yet? Have you had that experience for yourself yet?
No. Have you? I want to. Can you tell me about it? Because
I mean, it's you can't, right? That's the whole.
Yeah, you can't.
That's the whole, like, mystery school, mysticism,
Right.
blah blah. Can't translate that thing. Now I did do one good podcast on it where I'm not sure if you've done breath work yet.
A little bit, not a ton, but a little bit.
It's like cracked out meditation when done well. Like when you nail, you'll know when you nail it, because you'll come out of it like, what the fuck just happened, and can I get more of that all the time, anytime? And the answer is yes, right? Which is also powerful, because that's just like I said, meditation, force multiplied, and connections and scenes that you know in those moments that's just like a knowing, right? Like it can't be anything other than that. And more back to what you were saying before is, you don't need an external validation for that type of thing. You know this as truth, right? And so yes, right? And that's the question though, right? And I had a similar experience too, where this actually, so too, Elyse has been, guys, just again, so Elyse is actually responsible in part for Spiritual Dope as well. I don't know if I told you that or not. It was the interview with what was her name? The last one you got me in contact with, the spiritual marketing.
Regina. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'd interviewed Regina for the Prosperity Practice, which in its own right was fucking awesome.
Love it.
I did love it, actually. I enjoyed it, but I also realized that I was kind of trying to sell the people what they wanted, but then give them what they need. And finally, I was just like, you know what, fuck it, like your friend, right? Like, I'm much big, spirituality, right? Our spirits are much bigger than our bodies, and it's self-evident. There's like, recordings of it with just with your resonance, right? You talked about also like the mind heart coherence, experience that often, right? Yeah. And that's through meditation, but again, like through a number of things. Once you recognize how to connect that and resonate that piece, and then you're like, oh my, like all the time, like you're just like, it's so great. Anyway, so I interviewed her, and I was like, why am I holding back kind of the best part of me? The best part of like what I believe, right? Because here was this ex-lawyer fucking doing it, right? And I was like, why am I waiting, right? For who and this came all the way back from my first podcast too. Anyway, so first podcast was like, who gives me the authority to do this, right? I do. You do. You give yourself the authority to be you, right? To go out and do the things that you know that you can do, that you're capable of, that you're called to do, right? And that's what you're doing now. I get to be a witness to seeing you punch through like each layer of that shit, right? And that's what's been fun for me to kind of watch you too, because we've had, I feel like, kind of similar experiences in that, right? Be like, this is all shit. I'm out of here. This is good and better, and it's not even leveling up, right? It's just finding yourself in a different space, because even to it's a different level of awareness to what already is, right? It's just and goes back to your belief system. Be like, when do I get to decide like there's more? Well, there's a whole universe that is currently yours at your disposal. How do you want to use it, right? Do you want to use it? And if you want to use your human self, have fun with that, right? And you've experienced that. What do you want to do with your divine self? What do you want to do with your universal self? Like, what other kind of mindset can you put yourself into? And that's unlimited too.
This is so good. Oh my gosh, right? This is so good. Yes.
But so again, guys, it was Elyse who connected me with Regina. And then when I connected with Regina, my wife had a friend who was a medium as well and channeled with me. So it was a combination of my wife, whose childhood friend, who she connected me with my grandfather, like my passed away grandfather, like the closest, kind of man to me in my life. And doing it with Regina, and like it was like the medium wrote like a coming out letter of like mediumship, right? Like to her family, like, I'm coming out of the closet, medium type thing. So I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm coming out of the closet, like spirituality, and we're just gonna go do it. And ever since then, Elyse, blown up, blown. I mean, just the door's been blown off. The people I've connected with. I just interviewed, my man here. I released, and that was, following intuition. There was a 215 phone number, which is a Philadelphia area phone number. And I was like, "You're fucking up here. I'm calling." And I just called. I was like, listen. I was like, I got his PM, and she was awesome. Knew where she lived. We had this great conversation. I was like, I just got to let you know, I love this book. I've gone through it like 4 or 5 times. I lead groups on it, yada, yada. Yeah. Would he be open to being on the podcast? And she goes, you know what? He hates them. But let me see what I can do.
That's so cool.
But again, so thank you. Like, this is kind of like a tribute to a Elyse podcast. Just a lot of thanks, because it's been a lot of fun. And without your support, in part, of course, there's all other people that have been a part of the journey, but you've been a big part about it. So I thought I'd share that with you.
Thank you.
Well, and the audience.
Yeah. And I think too, just to see kind of how you've taken every step of your evolution and turned it into something that's good for other people. And I think that's really cool, because I do think back to when we were first working together, and it was like, how do we sell more of these? What were
widgets,
you selling for?
Whatever. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. That's the thing, right? But that goes back to what you were saying, like how, there was like, you were selling stuff and you were doing it where there was integrity issues. And it's like, you could sell something. Yeah. Maybe you could overcome some objections. Yeah. Maybe you could get this person to do this thing. But in the end, at what cost to you and who you are.
Yes, exactly. Like, what is it actually all about?
Well, so how do you, I think that leads into a really good piece. So how do you do it now, where you've got it all tied together, that you feel aligned with what you're doing?
I just really listen to what my body says about whether it's working with a particular client, whether it's launching a program. And I don't fault myself for changing my mind either. Like, I launched something new with the rollout of my new brand that was actually, it was based on what a shaman who I follow, what he does, which is like a $10 weekly drop-in, he calls it Healing Temple. And it's so much, I was like, oh, we should have that for sales. That would be so much fun. So I did like a $10 weekly drop-in sales training. And it's been fun, but it's like the numbers started off really high, and then they kind of dwindled with the number of women who were coming every week. And I used to go into panic about that. And now it's like, oh, cool, I'm being divinely guided to transform this into something else. So I'm transforming it into something slightly different, a monthly membership, and women are signing up for that really fast. So it's like just knowing that it doesn't have to be perfect, but if I listen to what I'm being told to do, I take the action, I'm not attached to it being that way forever. And then I just kind of keep receiving that guidance. And that's how I've launched my programs. That's how I choose which clients to work with. That's how I chose my brand colors, like all of it. It's just
I like the colors, by the way. They're a lot of fun.
Thank you. Yeah, they're bright.
You've done gold, white, and red, which are all which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
I like that too. Like you talked about, being able to change, kind of like your and in the business world, be ready to pivot. But being able to pivot, right? Being able to adjust on the fly is something that I think a lot of people have a challenge with too. How do you help them to overcome that? Like, be like, oh, I made this decision to do this thing, and I was told to commit, and oh man, if I just stick with it, persistence and yada yada yada. So how do you help somebody that's stuck in that space?
Yeah, gosh. And it's tough too, right? Because we hear self-discipline and persistence, and there's a lot of value. There's a lot of value to those attributes in a lot of ways. But I think sometimes we get, you hear like sunk cost theory in business. So I put so much time and energy into this, and we can hold on to something just because of that, just because we already invested a lot of money or a lot of time. And even in our core, if we know it's no longer the right thing. So again, it comes down to intuition. And so if I'm working with the client, we look at, okay, if you were starting this today, would you do the same thing? Like if you were starting from scratch, would you do the same thing? If the answer is yes, then it's okay. You probably just need to keep going at it for longer. Like it's keep showing up, keep doing it. Know that just like you said with the flower, when you plant it, it's going to take a hot minute sometimes, and that's okay. But if you're being honest and you wouldn't do it again the same way today, or you wouldn't run this program today, or you wouldn't I mean, this is a big one, but you wouldn't marry this person today, right? Like, and I'm not counseling people on relationships, so take that for what it's worth. But you kind of look at, okay, are you attached to this just because you've put so much time and energy into it? Or are you attached to it because it's actually what you're meant to be doing and it just needs a little more time to mature or grow or germinate?
I love that. I love, so again, I'm a big fan of the word grace these days. So give yourself a little grace and let, kind of, let that life energy just go ahead and propagate the way that it's supposed to. Right. And I love though too, that you're saying, if you started today, would you still do this? Right. Because again, we put all this energy into the sunk cost thing, even like, well, the Titanic sinks, it sunk, right? Like, I mean, fucking let it go, right? They jump off the boat because it is sunk cost and it hasn't accelerated you or gotten you to where you think you should be by now. And if you were to, kind of continue the trajectory, it's down at this point, right? I love it. I love it. So what, what is a hit of spiritual dope for you? Like, what, meditation, having, maybe looking at your son, what is something that, that's just your pure hit of spiritual dope?
I mean, it's totally hanging out with my son, Jack, now. Like, that's just to see the pureness of a little kid and to see how they just their wholeness and their pureness and his unfiltered laughter is so much fun. I absolutely love that. And then I think the other thing is just when I can show up and give or do something for somebody else that has nothing to do with me. And that's actually when I found myself a couple months ago, like going through some of that panic of like, oh my God, am I making the wrong decision or the wrong choice? That's part of how I would shift out of it, is I would be like, what can I do for somebody else right now to get my head out of my ass and focus on what really matters? And that always, to me, that always helps. It's that quick shift. It's like, what can I do for someone else? Whether it's write a comment on their social media, whether it's, I had a client who launched a book club. I was like, I'm going to join my client's book club right now because I know it's going to make him feel good when he looks in his inbox and sees that he's got a new member. So just stuff like that, right? It's always kind of getting our focus off of ourselves.
I love that. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be complex. No. Right. You can go out there and kind of give of yourself and support somebody else in small, meaningful ways. And you're going to feel better about yourself.
Yeah. Well, and it's the whole, have you read The Diamond Cutter?
No, I have not.
Oh, this will be a good one. I think you'll be into this. So the principle behind it is whatever you want for yourself, help someone else get it. Right. So I've got my my mastermind partner. She's also going for 7 figures in her business right now. So one of the things that I've done, and I told her, I was like, this is not entirely altruistic that I want to help you do this. Like I'm really curious energetically how this works for me.
I think that's interesting though, Elyse, right? Like when I started Fatherhood for the Rest of Us, it wasn't for the pure reasons. Right. It really wasn't. And I can look back and I can say that, right? I'm like, I did this for all the wrong reasons, but I was doing the right things, even if it was for the right reasons, wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And that kind of tilted the whatever, right? Into, I always say, like, I'm like the Grinch, my heart grew 2 sizes too large or whatever, right? Yeah. Like it went from being like, this thing to right. So I think that you, and I think, when you connect me with John Veroman back in the day, I remember him going into, talking about that, right? Being like, what happens if you do the right things with like the wrong reasons? Now, I would say, and wrong reasons is really kind of hard. You can't really say it's for the wrong reasons. You're really trying to do it for the benefit, yes, of you and of them. But like, that kind of shakes off. Just for, I mean, my experience has been that kind of shakes off. Like initially it's kind of like, I'm doing it mostly for me, a little bit for you, still feels okay. I'm doing it for like, at least I'm not calling you an asshole, right? Like, or a jerk, nobody's a jerk. I'm doing all these things. And eventually that it just kind of like rusts away until like this purity situation happens where like, that's just becomes who you are. Right. So there's really nothing wrong with like trying on different clothes until you find the pair that fits.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right? Yeah. Absolutely. And I think you always know, because it's the energy you're doing something and like, how do you feel while you're doing it? If you feel secretly like with this friend of mine who I'm helping her, I'm just kind of like consulting and helping her for helping her hit 7 figures in her business this year. It's like the energy that I feel around it when I do it. If I felt jealousy or if I felt scarcity or like, oh, I should be spending this time on my own stuff, exactly what you're talking about, right? Like doing it for the wrong reasons. But I think you can tell when you feel like whole, excited, fulfilled, relaxed while you're doing it. It's totally different.
You are at ease.
Yes, exactly.
You're at ease, and the things are easy. They're simple. They're fulfilling.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Super awesome, as always, to catch up with you. Unfortunately, we can't stay on all day. So where can we send people to go find more Elyse Archer?
Thank you so much for having me. ElyseArcher.com has all the things. And then on all social media, I'm at Elyse Archer. So would love to connect. I've got a podcast, She Sells Radio. So people can check that out. It's like sales with a healthy dose of spirituality mixed in.
Nice.
So,
what now?
Yeah.
Who would you say your ideal client is, Elyse?
It's often a younger me. And I'm not saying that in an egotistical way. It's just I can really help that woman because I know what's going on in her mind. So it's typically going to be a woman who is either a business owner or she's in sales. She's looking to break through her first 6 figures. And it's like something's not quite clicked there. But she's ready, and she's probably a little bit turned off by a lot of what she's being taught from either corporate sales training or from the books she's reading. And it just doesn't quite feel right to her. And she's like, could I reach my goals in a way that actually feels really good to me and other people? And I love helping that type of woman. So that's my ideal client.
Awesome, guys. Go check out Elyse, especially, if you meet that description. I can promise you that, it'll work out for you, right? Guarantee that, to go through some of the coaching or some of the programs that Elyse has to offer, they will be valuable to you.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. This has been wonderful.